or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Janice Marie Hunt, and for the next hour, I will be reading from the Sunday, August 9th, 2026 issue of the New York Times Arts and Leisure section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Classical. He was a librist for Mozart. Now Lorenzo da Ponte's descendants tend to his memory. Helped by his sons, Mike D of Beastie Boys fame returns with an introspective solo album. Television. Megan Park, who created the series Sterling Point, knows that teenage girls deserve more. Art. Our critic shares his 5 favorite places for an artistic experience in Venice. Dig into your past. You may uncover musical history. Alex da Ponte and his family keep alive the memory of Lorenzo da Ponte, a grocer and a librist for Mozart. In June, Alex da Ponte drove to Sunbury, Pennsylvania, to visit the town where one of his ancestors had run a grocery store. That grocer, Lorenzo da Ponte, also happened to be Mozart's most important librist, a protege of the Austrian emperor and companion of Casanova, a priest, seducer, and gambler, and the man who did the most to introduce Italian opera to the United States. Alex stopped in front of Lorenzo's house today, a Honduran market, and posted a long tribute on Facebook to his forefather, who had moved from Vienna to the middle of Pennsylvania more than 200 years ago. His life was chaotic, Alex wrote. He had big ideas and was always shooting his shot. Obviously, that's genetic. A singer and songwriter, Alex, 38, has been releasing music for the last 14 years, making a name for himself in the Memphis indie pop and alternative rock scene. His life shows how, for 8 generations, a family has held on to the memory of one of the most fascinating characters in history of opera, a survivor who bridged 2 continents and still has the power to shape his descendants' identity. As a child, Alex didn't pay much attention when his relatives discussed Lorenzo, but now he is the proudest inheritor of the da Ponte legacy. At the time, I didn't really know that I had Italian roots, he said in an interview in Memphis. And then when I looked into it, I was like, oh my God. He started digging into his family's past, gathering heirlooms, and reconstructing the family tree. His son, born in 2017, is called Oz Lorenzo. A few hundred miles from Alex in Nashville, another da Ponte is in a trade even closer to Lorenzo's. Olivia da Ponte, 27, Alex's second cousin, is a songwriter for Warner Chappell Music. She writes about 200 songs a year. Warner pitches some to labels and artists. Sometimes musicians come to her with ideas that she tries to put on paper. I'm kind of a facilitator. Help them say what they want to say, she said. Olivia has a general idea of her ancestor's life, but she doesn't come close to her cousin's obsession. Alex has a tattoo on his right arm reading Congelliano, Lorenzo's original surname. That's so much cooler than even da Ponte, he said. Emmanuel Congelliano was born in 1749 in the Jewish ghetto of a small town in the Republic of Venice. When he was 14, his family converted to Catholicism, and he took the full name of the local bishop, Lorenzo da Ponte. After taking holy orders, he moved to Venice, then in full decadent bloom, where he became a gambler and a seducer, befriending the king of womanizers, Casanova. In 1779, he was banished because of his scandalous lifestyle and the publication of seditious verses. Da Ponte wound up in Vienna, where he got in the good graces of Emperor Joseph II and became a popular lyricist. He worked with Salier Martin y Soler, and most importantly Mozart, for whom he wrote The Marriage of Figaro, Don Giovanni, and Casa fan tutte. In the second volume of Lorenzo da Ponte, E il suo tempo, a biography in progress that will probably reach 3,000 pages, Lorenzo della Cha wrote, Mozart's reputation as an opera composer was modest. Da Ponte's distrust of him considerable, their contracts rare, their friendship virtually non-existent, and the esteem almost nil. And yet, their collaboration changed opera for good, introducing three-dimensional characters, sophisticated plots, and ambiguities that broke with the tradition of good versus evil. His Australian idol didn't last long. After Joseph II died in 1790, Da Ponte lost favor with his successor and was expelled from Vienna. He moved to London, where he became the poet of the King's Theatre while setting up a series of enterprises that failed one after another. Burdened with debt, Da Ponte fled to the United States, stopping first in Philadelphia and then in New York. In 1805, there were very few Italians. Della Cha said in a phone interview with Milan, when he arrived, he set himself up as a grocer. Life in New York, a town of 60,000 in 1800, proved unsustainable. So Da Ponte moved to New Jersey and then to Sunbury, where he laughed at himself every time my poet's hand was called upon to weigh out 2 ounces of tea or measure half a yard of pigtail. He wrote in his memoirs, a pigtail was a twist of tobacco. Things changed when he returned to New York and at a Broadway bookstore met Clement Moore, author of The Night Before Christmas and son of Columbia College's president. Moore introduced Da Ponte to Manhattan's high society, and in 1825, Da Ponte became the first professor of Italian at Columbia. Da Ponte made it his mission to introduce Italian culture to the United States. How it was possible, he wondered in his memoirs, that there was no Italian bookstore in America, while in almost every city one finds the wines and the grapes of Sicily, the oil, the olives, and the silks of Florence, the sausages of Bologna, and then the macaroni of Naples. Da Ponte's last endeavor was to bring Italian opera to New York. In 1826, he persuaded a Spanish troupe to perform Don Giovanni and received a standing ovation at the premiere. He was 77, and after surviving defeat after defeat on 2 sides of the Atlantic in 2 centuries, that must have felt good. He spent the next years trying to persuade the tenor Giacomo Montrasor to bring his company to New York, but when he finally did, Da Ponte was cut out. Still in 1833, thanks to Da Ponte's efforts, the Italian Opera House opened at the corner of Church and Leonard Streets. In its place today stands the sculpture Anish Kapoor's Mini Bean, but an observant passerby might notice a sign at the intersection reading Lorenzo da Ponte Way. A copy now resides in Alex's living room. In 1924, the New York Times wrote that when da Ponte died in 1838 at 89, a long train of mourners followed the body from cathedral to the Roman Catholic cemetery. Most biographies end there, noting that da Ponte's remains, like those of Mozart, were later lost forever. The story of his American family, however, had just begun. One of his sons, Lorenzo Luguini, around 1804 to 1840, became a professor of Italian and replenished the family coffers by marrying the sister of a wealthy New Orleans jurist. He died only 2 years after his father. After that, it seems, his wife bid farewell to New York, starting the da Ponte's Southern branch, which survives today in New Orleans, Memphis, Knoxville, and Nashville. Lorenzo Luguini's son Durant, around 1829 through 94, built a career in the upper echelons of New Orleans journalism, was wounded while fighting for the Confederate Army, and got rich trading on the stock exchange. Socially influential, Durant married the most beautiful woman in the world, and she was anointed in the press. And the couple became famous for the plays organized at their 350-seat home theater, a divertissement Durant had likely learned as a child at Lorenzo's home. By then, Lorenzo's fame had already begun to fade. A 1906 biographical dictionary dedicated more space to Durant's entry than his grandfather's. We find one of Durant's sons, Harry, in the late 19th century on a riverboat smuggling weapons to the revolutionary forces of Porfirio Diaz in Mexico, while his son Harry II, 1885 to 1967, had an ordinary career in insurance. At this point, Durant's fortune had already been squandered. As Lorenzo's descendants multiplied and scattered, at least one branch never forgot him. David da Ponte Cooper, the first da Ponte I reached out to when researching the family, replied to my email within 10 minutes, rattling off his forefathers back to the librist. When David was born, the New Orleans mansion where his great-great-grandfather Durant used to stage plays was still standing. When his nephew Alex visited a few years ago, he found a bank there. Above Alex's fireplace, there's a framed shawl from Durant's wedding. We got bits and pieces like that from family heirlooms that survived the gambling, he said, referring to a passion that Lorenzo apparently passed on to some descendants. Two others, music and literature, have also made their way to the present day. Everyone in my family is musical, Alex said, pointing to a framed family tree that another da Ponte had compiled before him. And it all comes from that huge spread of the tree. Alex's songwriting cousin Olivia in Nashville wasn't conscious of how similar her profession was to Lorenzo's. Maybe there's some part of my desire and fascination with the writing that traces back to him, she said. Laura King, a professor of collaborative history at the University of Leeds in England, said in a phone interview that one's connection to family history is often a two-way street. How much that family history influenced you, King said, or is it the other way around? I would choose the bits of my family that make sense to me or my history that makes sense to me. I'll seize on that bit of musicality in my family and that tells me a story. I'll use that. Or I'll have a tattoo because it inspires me. Either way, Lorenzo would probably be pleasantly surprised to see the tattoo on Alex's arm. At the end of DePonte's life, a main concern was how much of Italy he had been able to import to America. In 1924, the Times noted that the name of DePonte may be unknown to the public, and today that is probably true again. Most people don't know who he is, Alex said. Whenever anybody interviews me for music stuff, they always end up asking, is there anybody else in music in your family? And I'm like, well, Alex's son, Oz Lorenzo 9, recently had a class project about family history. I was like, yes, this is our chance to shine, Alex told him. He doesn't care. I hope he will one day. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times Arts and Leisure section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. A Beastie Boy returns to the mic. Mike D is releasing Thank You, an introspective solo album he made with help from his two sons 14 years after the death of Adam Yauch. The 3-decade run of the Beastie Boys came to an abrupt halt in 2012 when Adam Yauch, a member of the trailblazing rap trio known as MCA, died of cancer at age 47. In the aftermath, Michael Diamond, aka Mike D, one of the two surviving Beasties, set out to make music on his own. Again and again, he queered up recording software on his computer and tried to create. Again and again, he couldn't go through with it. The amount of grieving and sadness that I would feel, Diamond recalled in an interview in May, the easiest way to not feel that was to shut the computer down and walk away from it. It was too much for me to process to stay focused and creative. After dipping into production for others and with help from family, Diamond 60 has returned to music making. On August 28th, he will release a solo album, Thank You, the first new music by a member of the Beastie Boys since Yauch's death 14 years ago. Thank You was made with the close involvement of Diamond's sons, Davis and Skylar. Brooklyn-born Californians, now in their early 20s, who have their own group, Very Nice Person, and hone their production skills on the vintage audio equipment they pilfered from their dad's home studio in Malibu, California. From its first notes, Thank You, credited to Mike D. 5D, is a searing, lo-fi blast of analog synthesizers, noise, and smashed industrial beats, bearing the influence of a dub and the dystopian New York punk band Suicide. At recent club gigs announcing the project, Diamond and his 5-member band, including Davis and Skylar, leaped up and down in Mike D 5D branded jumpsuits like a multi-generational punk aerobics class. With a level of introspection rarely heard on Beastie Boys albums, Thank You also paints a therapeutic portrait of Diamond adjusting to life as a sexagenarian rapper, Emerus, wrestling with the responsibility of parenthood and the sense of being far away and out of touch, while also searching for a way to stay in the game. I need a plan B, retired MC Diamond yelps on one of the album's most boisterous tracks, What We Got. Its music immature, but lyrically more mature. Diamond grain and still rail thin, summed up in the 5 warm lounge of a Lower East Side hotel a few hours after he finished spinning records for an online radio show in Brooklyn. Diamond grew up on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, the son of art world insiders, and from a young age felt destined for a creative life. A formative experience happened at age 17 on a trip to the Brooklyn Academy of Music to see Laurie Anderson's landmark performance art piece, United States. She had a tape head on her violin and tape on her bow, and there's a video projection. Diamond recalled, his eyes widening with the memory. It was really the first multimedia thing I saw. I was completely exhilarated. I was like, that's what I'm going to do. By that time, the Beastie Boys were morphing from their punk rock origins into rap and settling into a three-piece lineup of Yacht, Diamond, and Adam Horovitz, aka Ed Rock. The story of their rise is like a raunchy 1980s New York version of a fairy tale. Coming under the wings of Rick Rubin and Russell Simmons at Def Jam Recordings, they toured with Madonna and their 1986 debut, License to Ill, bumping Bon Jovi from the top of the Billboard 200 chart to become the first rap album to reach #1 in testosterone-drenched anthems like You Got It, Fight Your Fight to Party. And girls, they fully embraced their persona as obnoxious, smirking party boys, though they came to loathe it. Successive reinventions on albums like Paul's Boutique 1989, Check Your Head 1992, and Owl Communication 1994 made them prime Zeitgeist movers of the 90s. Their three-part comic rhymes densely layered with references drawn from pop culture's dustbin. Diamond's thin voice put him in a middle zone between Yacht's hoarse gruff and Horowitz's sharp nasal tone. These guys were intrepid creators, said Dan Charnas, an associate professor at the Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music at New York University. By the 90s, their work, musically and aesthetically, anticipated how pop culture would shift over the next 10 years. Hip-hop merging with punk and alternative, street culture with skater culture, satire with social good. Yacht became the group's conscious co-founding the Tiverton Freedom Concerts and on the 1994 track Sure Shot, atoning for the band's past misogyny. To all the mothers and the sisters and the wives and friends, I want to offer my love and respect to the end. Yacht's death brought an end to the musical partnership that Diamond and Horovitz had been part of since they were teenagers. There was a very recognizable thing that happened between our three voices, Diamond said. It was a magical thing, a rare gift that the three of us all got to share together. But that doesn't exist anymore, so it took a minute to just get comfortable with it. Diamond largely stepped back from music to care for his sons, who were then preteens. He and Horovitz also tended the Beasties' legacy through a book and a documentary. But both men's musical productivity plunged. In an interview, Horovitz said that for years he has maintained a near daily routine of making music on his laptop, but he hasn't released any of it. When asked why not, Horovitz mumbled, "Good question." Diamond produced for others, working on the most recent album by the high-concept Swedish punk band The Hives. The Hives Forever Forever, The Hives released last year, but he had a revelation. I shouldn't be projecting my ideas onto any other artist. I should be saving that for myself. So Diamond began sitting in on sessions with his sons, who mingled with some of the top producers in Los Angeles. In conversation, Davis 23 and Scholar 22 finished each other's sentence with surfer voice uptalk and call their father Mikey. They are also only loosely familiar with the Beastie Boys songbook, having to bone up on tracks for their recent club tour. Skylar, Mikey's had a funny trajectory of his vibes. Our more recent memory is his retired lifestyle. Davis, he was like fulfilled in other ways, and then it got to a certain point where he started getting on the mic more and just messing around in jams and stuff. And then one day he went to France and came back and was like, this is happening now. The Diamonds began creating songs with a cast of musicians and producers, including Carter Lang, who has worked with SZA and Justin Bieber, and Tyron Donaldson, another SZA collaborator. They held long anything goes sessions encumbered by deadlines or pressure to generate hits, an artist-led process that Lang likened to his experience with Bieber's recent Swag albums. They've been able to create this freeing feeling, Lang said. This environment where when I enter it, the industry grind just falls away and you're able to create out of pure discovery and love and curiosity. The studio was packed with a menagerie of ancient gear that the musicians tinkered with like lost toys. Songs like That's the Right Throb with noisy feedback and prickly, distorted rhythms. Horvitz lent Skylar and Davis a 1980s vintage sampler that came with floppy disks still holding Beastie Boys beats. It's a time machine, Donaldson recalled with a chuckle. They'd be trying to find a sound, and you'd randomly hear a drum break that was on a Beastie Boys song. The result is a blending of the murkily tuneful sound of Very Nice Person with a more aggressive rhythm punch that derives from the lo-fi punk of Diamond's youth. I suggested to Diamond that the process with his two sons sounded not dissimilar to how the Beastie Boys would hold up at a studio playground for moments before they emerged with a breakthrough sound. It gets weirder than that, Diamond said. I grew up the youngest of three brothers. In the band, I was the middle of three brothers in a sense, and then I end up having two boys. There you go. Diamond's sons, he said, could critique his vocals with the candor that none of the other producers all decades younger than Diamond could summon. Out of anybody I worked with, they were more innately comfortable with pushing me on my vocals, Diamond said. Their big line was, that was good, but you can top it. So they didn't totally annihilate me, he added in Dad Joke Deadpan. I don't know that Mike would have done this on his own, Horvitz said. We spent the bulk of our lifetime being in a band, a threesome that did everything together. And doing something on your own feels weird, he added. I think it's great that Mike has recorded a record, especially with his kids. I think it is probably really helpful and healing to him. Diamond sounds invigorated on Thank You, but also deeply reflective with lyrics that seem to address the stresses of parenthood and a broken relationship. Diamond is separated from Davis and Skylar's mother, the filmmaker Tamara Davis, as well as his own search for purpose. We all come from trauma. We fill our worlds with trauma, he raps on. Make it stop. On I Don't Care, he says, I try to please everyone. It's killing me. Everywhere music serves as a metaphor for how to refresh one's life. Switch up connection, switch up direction. He raps on switch up, driven by a very 90s style accelerated drum and bass rhythm track. I think this record very much reflects the times of my life, Diamond said, of my kids being their own entities in the world and collaborating with me. It's really about being honest, he added, the things that I'm grappling with at a different age in life that weren't present for me when I was in the band. He added, I think it's my process of being able to be okay with the unknown a bit. Over about 2 hours of conversation, he mentioned therapy 5 times. His son said they were worried their father's comfortable lifestyle would yield a luxurious rap vibe, with lyrics about being an older white rapper talking about drinking wine, as Scarlett put it. Instead, Diamond came to sessions with notebooks filled with deep psychological reflections he had collected on silent retreats. It's like the whole record's therapy rap, Davis said. It's really deep. Therapy concepts. We were just like, that's a sick vibe, Skylar added. That's just where Mikey's at. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times Arts and Leisure section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. She lets teen girls speak for themselves. Megan Park, creator of the new series Sterling Point, trusts her young performers. Megan Park remembers how it felt to say lines she didn't believe in, to wear clothes that felt weird, to spend hours in a chair each morning as makeup artists layered on foundation. Blonde and slight, Park 39 played adolescence well into her late 20s, which became increasingly unfulfilling. The more I think about it, the hair and makeup trailer killed it for me, she said. As an actor, I was like, I can't sit here any longer. Gradually, she shifted toward writing and directing. Her first film, The Fallout, about the aftermath of a school shooting, debuted in 2022. Her second, My Old Ass, about a teenage girl who meets her older self by way of PSILOCYBIN, was released in 2024. Amazon MGM Studios, which brought that film, asked Park to consider creating a young adult series. That series, Sterling Point, premiered on Wednesday on Prime Video. Set in the Muskoka Lakes region of southeast Ontario, where My Old Ass was filmed, it concerns a teenage girl, Ella Rubin, and her twin brother, King Ruffalo, who discovered that they have inherited an island there belonging to a grandfather they never knew. They also discover a sister, Amelia Hofferly. Park, now a mother of two, insists that teenage girls aren't her own source of inspiration. Her next film, she promises, is all about adults. But her movies and this new series allow her to give young performers a voice she didn't have. I remember being that young on set and being in their situation, said Park, who also directed 4 of the first season's 8 episodes. It's fun to go back and be like, how can I do it differently? On a recent video call from her home outside Toronto, Park discussed how she felt acting, why she trusts young performers, and what makes Gen Z unique. These are edited excerpts from the conversation. What made you turn to acting? When I was 6, they were doing a local production of The Sound of Music. My best friend was auditioning, and I was like, I want to audition too. I got the part, and I was hooked. Acting took off for me in a great way. It took me to LA, and it got me my first green card, and I met all these incredible people. But I felt, it's going to sound terrible, a little bored. I was watching people around me be so driven and feel so connected to it in this way that I knew I didn't really fully feel. Most of the things I acted on, it wasn't a super creative atmosphere. You were stuck playing teenagers well into your 20s. That was the job. You look at shows like The OC and One Tree Hill, everybody's like 30 playing a teenager, but it did start to feel unnatural at a certain point. And I was always like, this is not really how young people talk or live. How did you break out? I was in this movie, What If? It was one of the first sets I'd been on that felt creatively fun and free. Zoe Kazan and I played sisters. She was already writing and directing things. She hung the moon to me. I was pitching her an idea for a story. She was like, you could write it. I was like, wait, Zoe thinks I'm smart enough to write? So I opened my computer and just started writing. I was like, oh my God. Oh my God. Okay, this is literally so fun. This doesn't feel like work. This is addictive. It was so satisfying to me instantaneously. The first thing you wrote was about a girl trapped in a TV show, right? Yeah. It was about a girl who was in a Hannah Montana show in her late 20s playing a 12-year-old living a totally double life both on camera and behind the scenes, a dark 30-minute comedy. You don't have to stretch to see the allegory. No, totally. Everything I write, there's always a piece of me in it. That doesn't get made, but your next script, the Fallout does. So far, all of your green lighting projects have focused on teenage girls. Is that accidental or on purpose? A little bit accidental. The fallout came out of being so horrified about high school shootings in America and becoming a parent as I was living in the States. I was flabbergasted that kids had to go to school every day with this fear hanging over their heads. When I was writing My Old Ass, I wrote it thinking about it through the emotional lens of the older character. But people were like, wow, you are able to take a young female voice and make it feel authentic. How would you feel about doing that in the TV space? I just want teenage girls to be given the autonomy and the respect and the authenticity they so deserve. For them to have that space and that freedom to be themselves, letting them pick out their clothes, letting them have a real say in their hair and makeup. Young women, especially this generation, are so intelligent, so poised. They see the world in such an interesting way. It would be so sad to not give them the content they deserve, and not just the light, fluffy stuff that drives me crazy. What was the inspiration for Sterling Point? I always wanted to do something about the nature versus nature. I always wanted to do something about the nature versus nurture conversation because it's been so prevalent in my family's life. There's so much adoption on each side. And Muskoka Lakes, I grew up there. I grew up going there every summer. I also went to a summer camp on an island there as a teenager. It's so dreamy. You emerged as a writer and director around the time that you became a parent. How does that influence you? I always say to my daughter, you're the reason I found what I love because I was pregnant with her when I started writing. The fallout and the day I went in to have her was the day it got green lighted. My old ass was watching her splash in a puddle and being like, oh my God, time. Truthfully, my whole world is my kids. So naturally, those things are going to blend together. At least they did for me. How do you make sure that you portray teenagers authentically? How do you and the other departments make sure this feels realistic? Check your ego at the door. Know what you know and know what you don't know. Wow. One of my most important jobs is finding incredible, talented young people and passing the characters over to them. You have the resource of all these people who are actually young and know what's cool. Let them tell you. What do you love about Gen Z? They're so kind. My experience as a millennial, there was a lot of bullying and cattiness. These young people, I call them kids. They're not really kids. I witnessed them be so kind to each other, so respectful. I don't know if they've just gotten lucky, but with the young people I work with, they're really thoughtful. I would rename them the heartfelt generation. They lead with their hearts. I love that word. I love that word, heartfelt. It's the lamest word to say in the industry, but I want to make heartfelt stuff. And if people think that's dumb, whatever. I like characters even if they're flawed, even if you don't understand them, they are inherently good and kind. That generation really represents that. In Venice, artistic places worth perusing. Venice has struck visitors for centuries as otherworldly, a city of memory floating in a lagoon, but also decadent, feverish, and a constant risk of submersion. Half fairy tale, half tourist trap. Thomas Mann called this place in Death in Venice, and his double diagnosis has only grown more acute in the Instagram and EasyJet age. Every time I wash up here, I go through the same cycle. First, the thrill of seeing the light shimmering on the water, then aspiration from over tourism as if I'm not part of the problem, and finally, once I settle into its rhythm and rediscover its paintings and palazzi, a renewed awe. Take it slowly, look past the selfie sticks, and Venice is still sublime. The first painting, a half-lost painting, more sacred for its scars. Titanian, Tintoretto, and Veronese form the Holy Trinity of the Venetian Renaissance, but the most heart-stopping painting in this city was done by a Sicilian. In a quiet corner of the Museo Choir, you'll find a tender depiction, not too large, suitable for private devotion, of the dead Christ comforted by three angels, clustered over an open tomb. Antonello da Messina, who painted this around 1476, was one of the first Italian artists to embrace the exciting new Flemish technology of oil paint, whose slow drying times allow him to render the skin tones of Christ's wounded body with then unprecedented naturalism. Christ's knees seem to come out of the picture into our world. The Strait of Messina glistening in the back as if through an open window. But one or more restores blew it big time. And Antonello's painting has been severely damaged. The faces of Jesus and the three angels are now almost entirely gone. The seraph's blanked out legs slice open the Sicilian landscape. The miracle of Antonello's Pieta, though, is how much authority it retains despite the damage, or maybe even gained from the injury. The mystery of the Triduum, the 3 days when Christ was both alive and dead, finds an echo in this abraded painting, lost but still here, and now at the museum resurrected. This masterpiece of Renaissance painting can only be found within a masterpiece of modern display. In the 1950s, the great Venetian architect Carlo Scarpa was tasked to redesign the Coors Picture Gallery overlooking Piazza San Marco. He conceived of a simple easel made of iron and wood by Venetian artisans who are still working, bringing the paintings off the wall and back into our face. Antonello's vision of the tomb still hangs on one of these self-supporting frames, suspended between this world and the next. Number 2, a palace dense with gods on the walls and in the air. At the height of its power in the early 1500s, the merchants and magistrates of the Venetian Republic built palaces and monuments that would rival Rome's. One family in particular bought in bulk. Palazzo Grimani, a grand pile of colored marble, was a showcase for a noble family with a mania for collecting antiques, which he displayed in a purpose-built tribuna or receiving room. The sculptures got scattered in subsequent centuries, but in 2019, Palazzo Grimani reopened the antiques chamber with over 200 Greek and Roman statues. This was a temple of humanism, and it still staggers centuries on. Here, the gloomy Gothic decadence Venice makes way to a light-filled splendor, modeled after the Roman, the words cut off. With so many sculptures, it can feel like a staring contest. Apollo and Anteos face down Aphrodite and Dionysos. Goddesses nestle in scalloped niches, and river deities perch on the pediments. Look up the ceiling with its sunken coffers, its glazed skylight, and who is that flying through the air? It's the beautiful young Ganymede kidnapped by Zeus in the form of an eagle. I get dizzy when I look up at him, and not only from the optical illusion. His face through a nose retains a thrilling, disconcerting look of fear and delight. Before the birth of the modern scientific museum, noble collections like Grimani's had their own conception of sophisticated display, intentionally dense, placing more importance on the total visual effect than individual objects. Almost 500 years later, the reconstruction of this room is its own achievement in archaeology, as well as just an eyeful of beauty. Number 3, a secret hidden garden hiding behind one of Italy's finest churches. There are nearly 140 churches in Venice, and you could make it your business to visit them all. But my one and done pick is happily never too crowded. The Church of the Most Holy Redeemer, better known as the Second Redentor, standing proud on the island of Giudecca and facing Venice proper with a facade of blinding white. This is a plague church. The word quarantine, you may know, comes from the Venetian practice of ordering 40 days isolation on visiting sailors, built in the grateful aftermath of a lethal pandemic in the 1570s. Andrea Palladio, the golden child of Veneto architect devised a groundbreaking design with a grand staircase, overlapping pediments, plus a dome that looms above the island. Every July since it opened, Venetians build a pontoon bridge across the basin, linking Redentor with the rest of the city in gratitude for the plague's end. So far, so synonymous, but what I want you to discover is behind Palladio's gleaming facade, a secret garden unseen for centuries by anyone who wasn't a Capuchin friar. In 2024, following years of negotiations and renovations, not to mention a flood that salted the earth, the Redentor Garden is now open to the public. Simple wooden pergolas laid out in a cross naturally segment the garden after the medieval fashion into zones for flowers, herbs, fruit trees, and vegetables. An apiary, a lily pod, chapels of modest brick, these simple elements in the midst of heaving Venice frame a lagoon site Eden. It's special enough to have this garden as a refuge. Redentor is in sight of the cruise ship terminal, after all. But I love it here because this garden is a civic and religious institution just as much as the church. You come here for an hour's calm, but you leave feeling that an apricot tree has much more sanctity as an altarpiece. An ancient mosaic intact on a near abandoned isle. The idle islands of Venice are numerous, nearly 3 dozen, and various with functions ranging from glass manufacturing to mental asylum. The most evocative of them may be Torcello in the north of the lagoon, which was the first of the islands in the marsh to be inhabited by landlubbers escaping barbarian invasions in the 5th century AD. Almost nobody lives here anymore, but on this spongy wetland is one of the most astonishing works of religious art in Italy, a boggling action-packed mosaic that is a relic of Byzantine Venice, spanning the rear wall of Santa Maria Santa, the oldest church in the lagoon. This wall of gold depicts Christ 3 times over, first on the cross, then pulling Adam and Eve out of hell, and then presiding over the last judgment. A river of fire cohering from thousands of red and white tiles guides our eyes to the right of the door. A hell where angels fan the flames. All the green tiles are on the left side of the door. A land of milk and honey, a paradise of glass. Choose your own ending. In the 12th and 13th centuries, the artisans from Constantinople who laid down its uncountable tesserae had a pretty obvious iconographic mission. Let these parishioners know that your immortal soul was no trifling matter. But there are no parishioners any longer on Torcello, just day trippers. The mosaic of the Last Judgment, therefore, has a stranger, more haunting tinge. Long day doomsday, we may see a preview of the end in the midst of holiday. And number 5, the final artistic place worth perusing, a contemporary architect's reinvention of a shadowland. Venice for 500 years has been a city of the dead. Time seems to hang in the air. Beauty can't be untangled from decline. All of that becomes literally on San Michele, the island cemetery and final home of Ezra Pound, Igor Stravinsky, Sergio, and so many other Venetian adoptees. But if you hop the Vaporetto to this little island wrapped by brick walls and dotted with high cypresses, you'll find a new chapter in the life and death of an old city. The firm of David Chipperfield, that Berlin-based British architect of restrained monumentality, has spent decades renovating and extending Venice's external resting place. He first subdivided its repetitive rows of graves into elegant courtyards, and then built an ossuary and other service elements on a new extension. The outer walls of the same gray Istrian stone familiar from Venice's church, but inside, around the graves, are thin columns of concrete. This is very quiet architecture in a city that can be very loud, and yet the restrained character of Chipperfield's courtyards has restored the romance of San Michele, where for so long visitors to Venice mopped and marveled. On many visits to the city, I'd pay San Michele no mind, chugging past its vaulted brick bulwarks on the way out to the airport. Chipperfield has remade the island of the dead as a place for the living. Inside Culture. A satire on the City of Angels, Hollywood Shuffle Robert Townsend's exuberant take on life as a struggling black actor with big dreams in the 1980s is an Amazon Prime Video. Also, the charming, family-friendly The Sheep Detectives, the upbeat science fiction fantasy Project Hail Mary, and more. Hollywood Shuffle in 1987, The Sheep Detectives 2026. Project Hail Mary 2026, The Master 2012, and Tangerine 2015. Chris Maggio spent a week last summer at the International Stunt School in Seattle, photographing aspiring stuntmen and stuntwomen as they learned about falling from great heights, taking punches, intricate fight choreography, and other tricks of the trade, all safely. Above, a student has a protective gel applied before being set on fire. The most nominated limited series is hands down the best TV show of the year. 16 Emmy Award nominations. Outstanding limited series, Beef. Supporting actress Young Jung. Supporting actor Charles Melton. Discover Beef, creator diaries, and explore Lee Sung Chin's vision and creative process. A masterpiece, Lee Sung Jin's series remains an untouchable force. Give him 100 beefs. I'll be watching them all. From Emmy winner Lee Sung Jin. Lead actor Oscar Isaac. Lead actress Carey Mulligan. Kids Night on Broadway. Kids Go Free, August 25th. Presented by the New York Times. For more information, visit kidsnightonbroadway.com. Participating shows are subject to change while supplies last. The Kids Night on Broadway performances for The Great Gatsby and Six, the musical, will occur on August 26th. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Sunday, August 9th, 2026 issue of the New York Times Arts and Leisure section. We read from the New York Times Arts and Leisure section every Sunday at 3 p.m. Your reader has been Janice Marie Hunt. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the re-airing of this morning's Buffalo News. Following that at 6 p.m. is the Buffalo News Viewpoints. Stay tuned for this reading and more throughout the day. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability.